You're listening to Art Affairs, episode number 3. Today I'll be talking to Frank Gonzales. Alright, so my name's Michael Faith, and this is Art Affairs. If this is your first time listening, thanks a ton for tuning in. Art Affairs is meant to give you a look at and into the new contemporary art community, featuring artists, gallerists, curators, printmakers, shining a spotlight on the human side of the wonderful work they do. You can dig through previous episodes, complete with show notes, at artaffairespodcast.com, and you can check out new episodes on all your favorite podcast platforms. If you're on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, I'd be super grateful if you took a moment to rate and review the show. Seriously, it helps a ton. And of course, if you like what I'm doing here, be sure to subscribe. And you can always connect with the show on Instagram and Facebook at artaffairespodcast. Or on Twitter, it's at art_affairs. All right, so today's guest is Arizona native Frank Gonzales. I actually met Frank for the first time back in May of this year, 2019, when I was visiting Mesa for Esau Andrews' show. Mesa, being Esau's hometown, was where the show was at the museum there, Mesa Art Center. And Frank actually works as a preparator for that museum, which I had absolutely no idea. I had been following Frank's work for a while on Instagram, and lo and behold, I ran into him at the show. He was preparing the show. He makes incredible artwork featuring all sorts of desert life, desert plant life, usually paired with birds. Of course, my passion for birds is how I found his work. But I know the desert plant life in particular is something he's really passionate about. We talk about that. We talk about growing up in Arizona, his time moving to Southern California, then to New York, and then back again, what he likes to call his hero's journey, and a whole lot more. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Frank Gonzales. Frank, thanks, brother, for coming on the show. I'm really glad to have you on.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Awesome. So I first met you back in May when I was down in Mesa for Esau's show, and you work at the museum there, which I'd like to talk about a bit later. But what I think is interesting is you actually grew up not far from there, right, in Tempe?
Yeah. I was actually born in Mesa, and then grew up in Tempe, and ironically now I live in Mesa.
Yeah, that's and what was your childhood like there? Did you have any siblings?
No, I actually grew up an only child. I grew up with a cousin of mine who was an only child as well, so she was like my sister.
Oh, nice.
Growing up. So, but yeah, it's funny growing up a single kid. You know, I have these stories my parents would tell me that I'd play with my toys and like put them away on my own and just put myself to bed. And they always talk about that, like how quiet I was, and like, I don't know, just kind of did my own thing.
Where did you learn that from? Was it just natural?
I don't know. I guess I'm just comfortable being alone.
Interesting. And what sort of work did your parents do?
My dad was a contractor for an independent contractor doing construction, drywall. And my mother worked at Motorola. So she always worked the night shift. And so my dad worked during the day. And so, yeah, it worked out. I mean, they were kind of like two passing ships in the night, you know? but it was great. You know, like I would spend my summers like on construction sites helping my dad. He'd be giving me various tasks, and, you know, I would be working a scissor lift when I was a kid.
Oh, wow. Holy
sanding
cow.
ceilings and stuff.
That doesn't sound safe at all.
I know. It was a different time, man.
Right on. No, I hear you. And I hear you were quite a jock in high school. You played sports, right? What sort of sports did you play?
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I did wrestling, football, and a little bit of track. But track was just shot put and stuff, and just eating sunflower seeds. But I mean, a lot of it was a lot of the sports was pretty much, to make my family happy
Mm.
and stuff. And my senior year in high school, I remember I was just so into my art classes that I told my parents, I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. And they're like, well, you know, okay. So I remember walking into this was like, yeah, senior year, varsity and all that. I walk into my coach's office after school one day, and I'm like, I said, I have no future in this. I'm done. I don't want to do football anymore. And he just kind of looked at me, just kind of shocked, like, okay, okay. So I went and cleared out my locker, and people were like looking at me like, you just quit like that?
Yeah,
I'm
you're
like,
just like,
yeah,
I'm good.
yeah, I'm done. I want to do art.
And so your parents were super supportive of that decision for you to pursue like a passion in art?
Well, well, they definitely had their doubts, of course, but regardless, they were super supportive of me. Their whole thing was just keep your nose out of trouble,
Mm.
get the best grades you can get, and we'll be good, And I actually I praise them for that, because I was a graffiti writer, and so my room was destroyed. Like I would test out paint, I would write on the walls. People that would come over would write on the walls and this and that. And it's funny. It wasn't until recently I was talking to my wife about it, and I realized I was making my own like sanctuary, my own chapel.
Yeah.
I was like making my own space of art to dwell in. I was living in it.
That's amazing. So you were like tagging up your own walls in your house?
My room, the rest of the house was fine, but my room, yeah, was completely destroyed.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't destroyed, but yeah, I mean, we would write on it and this and that and stuff. And, my parents weren't too happy about me taking off in the middle of the night to go writing and stuff, but my mom used to always be pissed, saying, don't, I don't want you out spraying, don't be spraying.
So you were part of like a actual graffiti crew, right? Tempe
Yeah.
Bronx crew, right? So tell me
Mhm.
about that. How did that get started? And how'd you get involved with those guys?
Well, it was some guys that I met. It's just some people that we had similar interests. Once I started getting into graffiti and writing and this and that and hip hop and whatnot, we kind of came up with this idea of we didn't want to be just graffiti writers. We wanted to represent the whole culture. The four elements of hip hop. With b boys, DJing, graffiti, and MCing. And so we kind of created this crew called the Tempe Bronx, but we spelt it with the K instead of an X to kind of give homage to where the birthplace of hip hop was, to the Bronx. And yeah, some people clowned us for it, but we got respect for it, you know what I mean? Because we were cool with most crews and this and that, but I don't know, we wanted to build this, there was a lot of people in the crew that some were MCs, but then they dabbled in writing too, and this and that, and I don't know, it was cool. Like we would spend every Friday and Saturday night on this on Sixth and Mill. This Mill Avenue was this little street down there by the university, and we would we'd have our mat out there, and graffiti writers would come. They would show their black books and stuff. We'd be b-boying out there on the corners. Like we were into it, man.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
That's a really cool experience, I'm sure. And was most of the art that you were creating for your graffiti like letter forms and some of the big tag pieces that you would see?
Oh yeah, yeah. It was all letters.
Okay.
Some characters, but mostly just trying to develop hand styles and trying to do burners.
Very cool. What were I mean, it sounds like this culture was very influential to you. What were some of your other like early influences artistically?
Um, I used to listen to a lot of reggae too. I remember in high school, I had another buddy of mine that I grew up with, like I knew since kindergarten. He had this trailer in the back of his house, and so we'd hang out, and like it was like a little RV, and so we'd hang out like on stay the night at his house like on Friday nights, and we listened to this local radio station called Reggae Street, and we listen to reggae and just copy Looney Tunes characters and stuff, and just it's so funny. It's like everything always involved. And when I think about it, everything involved like drawing something or
Yeah.
something like that, you know. But I do remember at the local, like at the corner of our street, there was a community center, and this was in the '80s, and I remember, from then seeing the only time I saw real graffiti that wasn't cholo writing or anything was, on Beach Street or Break In or something like that. And I remember some kids went out one night and just, you wake up one day and just you see this wall just bombed. And, it's simple stuff, but a big Adidas shoe, big bubble letters and this and that. And that pretty much changed, like, wow, like that stuff real,
Yeah.
that turned me out, man.
That's really cool.
Yeah, another big influence was like Thrasher magazine, or looking at skate magazines, looking at all the graphics. I mean, God, the Santa Cruz, the Rob Roscop, the Gator boards, like just, oh man, I remember just oohing and eyeing. My goal in life was to have a Gons board, you know what I mean? But I ended up getting a Veriflex, but heavy as hell, or or a swap meet special.
Yes. So were you into skateboarding as well? Was that a big part of your childhood?
Yeah, it was one of those things that you did as a kid, but then back in the '90s, I picked it up again, and getting heavily into it. I mean, I was never good. I knew I was never going pro, but I did it for fun. I mean, I've been skating again too, and it's different when you're in your 40s.
Yeah, you got to take more care of yourself.
Oh yeah, I have no problem with wearing pads, and and I mean, I don't even skate right. You know what I mean? I mean, I skate Mongo. I skate quote unquote the wrong way, but I'm like, I don't care.
As long as you're having fun, man. As long as you're having a good time.
Yeah, exactly. I roll around, I can do my little pop shove-its and little grinds here off the coping. I'm happy with that, dude. But just doing a little shove-it, the fear is kind of there. So I remember I just took my son to the skate park last week and trying to practice a shove-it, and you kind of, you get a little scared. And boom, what do? We roll your ankle. So now I'm out for a week.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Oh,
Things hurt.
that sucks.
Yeah, it hurts to fall when you're in your mid 40s.
Hell yeah, man. So after you left high school and you had sort of decided that you want to pursue art as a career, you started taking classes at the local community college, right? Did you feel that was a valuable experience?
Oh man, it was the best experience I ever had, man. First year I went to Phoenix Community College just to take gen ed classes. And then I ended up meeting some other friends as time went on, and actually as time went on, during that first semester. And I heard about this one teacher at MCC in Mesa, and I heard there was kind of like a waiting list to get into his class because he taught figure drawing and figure painting. And so I transferred, and I remember taking his class. His name was Jim Garrison. It was Jim Garrison, this other artist, or this other instructor, Darlene Swaim, and the rest is history, man. Like I exhausted every class that I could take from these instructors. I mean, they gave the foundation of, the first time I saw my instructor give a demo and see him create a figure right in front of my eyes with the, like do a gesture drawing, just right there.
Yeah.
It got me hooked, man. I was hooked.
Yeah, and from what I've read, he was actually recognized your talent fairly early on and sort of encouraged you to develop that, right?
Yeah. I definitely hold that dear, man. It was great because I mean our critiques were brutal. Like like anyone that's taking classes from this guy, like understands it's like this little kind of cult following, I guess, because like he would give demos, and then someone would record it on their VHS recorder, and then we'd make copies of that and watch them on our own. But when it came down to like critiques, like you'd be scared to turn it, like if you didn't do your home assignment, like and then you would hear these past horror stories and stuff, but they weren't brutal to the point of like you would just get you'd get put down. No, it was all constructive criticism, but it was like straight real. So I remember when I went to art school finally in like sitting in one of the critiques and like just kind of being used to that environment, I look like the asshole in the class. I was like, oh, whoops.
You're like tearing everybody else down.
Yeah, like saying, oh, this part's great, but that foot, man, you got to work on that. Or like, you know, because when you see figure drawings, there's always this apprehensiveness to, you know, to follow through with a hand or a foot just to make a mark, and it's like, hey, this is great, but you got this floating figure. Like you better resolve that.
Yeah. Well, it's great that you had somebody that was such a important figure in your life artistically
Yeah.
that early on in your stage. It sounds like he was pretty instrumental to your development and growth.
Oh, for sure.
So then how did you ultimately, you ended up getting a scholarship to go to college in Laguna, right?
Yeah.
So how did that come about?
I remember there was a portfolio days, and my instructor encouraged me to go to it, and I was a little apprehensive, but he was like, "Just go, just go check it out, because he suggested I go to art school, and at the time I didn't even think of going to art school. Like I'm Chicano. You don't leave your family. You know what I mean? You don't leave where you're from. No one in my family went to college, so it's like, they were just like, oh, why don't you just stay here, go to ASU, So I went ahead and I went through it. I went to the portfolio days and showed my portfolio around, and I remember having my portfolio from a rep from Art Center going through it, and they're like, yeah, you're ready. And I thought, this is Art Center, like that's where they breed just badass artists, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then I remember going to the table from the rep from Laguna, and her name was Susan DeRosa. And she looked at it and she was just like, wow, like, this is great, and like she was enamored by it, like, well, you're really ready, you're a bit ahead of the curve, and then I remember she kept in contact and they offered me like a half-ride scholarship. And I was like, all right, I'm in it. Let's do it. And I had no idea where Laguna Beach was. All I knew, it was California and it had the word beach in it. So I thought, I was so naive. I thought, this is going to be great. I could live in a little beach town and go to art school. Like, this is cool, Yeah, big awakening when I moved out there, but
Was it hard to leave home? Because it sounds like you were really close, to your family. And
it was a bit tough, but I was at that point where I was ready, man. I was so ready for adventure. You know what I mean? And so, um, luckily, I had a girlfriend at the time she was a big supporter. So she helped me pretty much get out there. Her father lived in San Diego, so we stayed with him while we were looking for a place up in Orange County. So yeah, I was ready, man.
what did you major in out there?
Painting and drawing. Actually went in as illustration, and then I kind of transferred to fine art, painting and drawing, just because I wanted more time with the figure, because it was more figure based. You know, um, I mean, I vibed with people from different departments anyway, so it was kind of hard to make that decision of just sticking with one. But either way, because I mean, I loved illustration because they're about getting it done, and it's about being able to draw and get your shit in, you know.
Yeah.
That's one thing I kind of wished I would have had earlier on in art school. It wasn't until like you're later on, like your senior year, when you're giving your presentations and you're with different departments, different disciplines, and you're doing presenting. Um, because each it's funny. There's like this thing in art school where they all stick with each other. The animation kids stick with animation, and
Oh yeah.
But I'm like,
Little clicks.
yeah, and I'm like, you could learn so much from everyone. You know what I mean? Like, these guys from animation are drawing their asses off. Like, fine art people need to learn to hang out with these dudes and draw as much and fill up sketchbooks as much as they are doing. You could learn so much from composition from the graphic design kids, and but it was cool to be able to make friends with. You know, I think I kind of just got off tangent from the question, but
No worries. And so, as far as like living in Southern California, did you enjoy that experience? Was it very different than what you had experienced in Arizona?
yeah, man, it was great. It was a whole new experience. It was sunny. I mean, not like meaning it was a different kind of sunny because I come from the Valley of the Sun, obviously, but the weather was amazing. It's like I could bounce to the ocean, which I would spend so many times just driving by myself, going to the ocean and just sitting there, just watching the waves, hypnotically. Yeah, it was awesome. Fortunately, I had a job to where I was able to transfer, so I was able to have a job when I moved. I ended up settling and ended up living in Costa Mesa,
Okay.
which was awesome.
And you stayed there for a couple years even after you graduated, right?
Yeah, yeah. I ended up. I lived in Southern California for about 6 years total,
And then you moved all the way across the country to Queens.
all the way to New York. Yep.
So what prompted that? What motivated you to go to New York?
Again, it seems like it's always a dame that kind of gets you from
Oh,
one place to another.
okay.
But it was great because I mean I'm so grateful for these people that have crossed my paths, that I've crossed paths with. Some of them I'm still friends with. Despite how things went down, I've always kept good. Because it's these people got you somewhere. Everyone in your life. No one gets anywhere by themselves.
Right.
You know what I mean? Whether good or bad.
For sure.
And so I liken my journey to or I like to compare my journey to Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. You know what I mean? You get all these guys in your life that kind of help you get where you need to go, and then
Yeah.
you end up making this full circle.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that because I've read that you sort of associate your own experiences with that kind of story arc,
Mhm.
which is interesting because like the hero's journey, you go off on adventures in far off lands and then ultimately come back home after learning all these new things and benefit your hometown with all the things that you've learned, right? Which is
Yeah,
very much exactly what you did, right? You went to Southern California all the way across the country to New York, and now you're back at home.
yeah.
What sort of work were you doing in New York when you moved out there?
Oh man, a lot of just experiencing a lot of artwork wise. I was really just trying to find my voice. I mean, I guess you're always trying to do that, but it's a time where you're out of art school, and that's where a lot of the discipline comes in because you're kind of thrown into the fire. It's like, a lot of people stop making art because, you got to make up your own assignments, and so being being in that environment, being in a city environment that I'd never experienced before, I soaked it up. Like, you know, the moment you walk out of your door in New York, you're engulfed in it. You know what I mean? And just walking down the street, just being in the veins of a city like that helped feed my work.
Mm,
I was I worked for I was full time for a little bit. I don't know, you could say full time. I didn't have a job for a little bit, I guess you could say, when I first moved there. I was just making art. And then fortunately one of the galleries that I worked at, an artist that was had representation in New York, or the people that rep them, because he was an artist from Spain. I ended up contacting them, haven't had an interview, and just worked for them part time. They had a publishing company for children's books, and they also had also worked in the fine art field, kind of as a wholesaler, as a middleman. And so they ran it out of their loft on 19th and Park, which was an amazing experience. There's like a little section where they had their office, and they had cats, and it had these humongous windows, and it was just north of Union Square, and it was awesome. It was amazing. I mean, I got paid under the table. It was cash every week. You know?
and I'm sure that that was an even bigger difference in your like life experience. I mean, you grew up in Arizona. Southern California arguably has somewhat similar climate. At least you have the sun and the heat, and
Hmm.
now you're going up to New York where it's snow and it's like totally different, right?
Oh,
And a big,
oh
huge
man,
city that
yeah.
you're now right in the middle of.
Oh
So,
yeah.
how did was that difficult to adjust to?
Oh God, yeah, man. It honestly took me about 2 years just to feel comfortable, like
Mm,
to feel like you were in it. You know what I mean? To be able to get out of the take the trains and come out on the street and know which direction was north, south, east. But it yeah, it was amazing. I mean, just to be able to experience 4 seasons was so cool.
Oh yeah.
I mean, think because in Arizona, it's like nice, hot as balls, and then nice. You know what I mean? And I think Southern California is like that too. It's like nice, and then it's like foggy, and then it's just nice. But yeah, it's like it is Gotham City. Like it really is like how they portray it on TV. Like you know what I mean? And it's cool. I learned that the things I loved about it, I hated about it, and the things I hated about it, I loved about it. You know what I mean? New York is a complete love-hate relationship. You know, it's a hustle. It's what I needed. It's yeah. It was cool. It was amazing on how living in Southern California, my work was really dark. Real figuratively, working in a lot of grays, blacks, white.
Mm.
And then I moved to New York, and then that's when I start to introduce a lot of color to my work. So I like the opposite. I go to a darker city, and then I start introducing color. Maybe it's subconsciously it kind of fed into the environment.
Yeah,
So
it's sort of a counterbalance to what you were
yeah,
experiencing around you, right?
yeah, for
That's
sure.
interesting.
Yeah.
So how did you end up going back to Arizona? Because you spent about around 6 years also in
Hmm.
Queens, and then you moved back home where you are now.
Yeah.
What led you back to Arizona?
Um. Again.
There's a theme here. I'm detecting a theme.
But living in New York, I guess say I got hitched and ditched, if you will. Like, I got married. I experienced marriage. I experienced divorce. Which was the best and worst thing that ever happened to me. Being able to feed all that energy into making work. I think that's where so much of my work grew. And then being on my own in New York was, oh, it was scary as hell, and it was amazing. You know what I mean? It was cool.
Wow.
So I'm living there on my own for a while, and then I reconnect with a friend of mine that we were like best friends that I've known since 7th grade. And I never had a social media at the time, MySpace, and actually Facebook just started. My friend of mine was like, "You should get on Facebook." And I thought, what use do I have on there? Like, no, that's dumb. So I get it on there, and I'm like, well, okay, what do you do now? This is boring. You know what I mean? So I ended up looking up an old friend of mine that we did not have contact for about over 6 years, I guess. And come to find out, she found out that when I got married, and she was invited, and she was kind of pissed.
Uh-oh.
But yeah, she was in San Diego. So, anyways, long story short, we reconnected. We both kind of had relationships that were kind of in the dumps, and we were doing our own thing. We met up back in Arizona for the holidays, and it was cool. It was like a reunion. We met up at a brewery that's at Four Peaks in Tempe, and then went back home and did our own thing. And then we just, thank God for Skype, we pretty much kept in contact every night. And it got to the point where we were talking. It's like, all right, either you move out here or I move out there. And then I remember it was like spring in New York, and I'm like, this is why you live here. So I remember walking to work, and I was like, I said, you've never lived in New York, and this is when you can ever live out here. I said, come out. So she came out, moved out. We lived together for a while, and then it was like, okay, do we want to do another winter? No, I think it's time. I think it's time to go back. So,
Yeah, that winter, man, that'll drive you out.
oh yeah, yeah. It's funny because my wife didn't realize until she's like, she was born in California but grew up in Arizona. She's like, I just realized that I'm a winter baby. She's like, my birthday's in February. She's like, this is really winter, and I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we ended up coming back home, and the rest is history.
Very cool. And did your time away, sort of spending time in Southern California, then New York, when you finally did come back home, did it sort of give you a greater appreciation for Arizona and sort of the world that
Oh
you had
man,
grown up in?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think I was getting a little homesick while in New York, and so my mom got me a subscription to Phoenix Home and Gardens.
Mm,
So I would just kind of flip through that, and definitely the things that I took for granted growing up there. I remember coming back and just seeing how colorful the desert was again.
uh,
Just falling in love with the plant life. Um, as far as inspiration for art, but I remember coming back home, being gone for about almost 12 years, and feeling like a tourist in your own hometown. The landscape completely changes. A lot of people you grew up with, either moved away, there's a whole new art scene. There's all this. And it was daunting just thinking, gosh, like, how am I going to get my foot in the door here?
yeah, you missed so much. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't get to see, downtown Phoenix flourish and grow.
mm,
There's all these new galleries and this and that. And I was like, God, I don't even know where to start, man. And so I think it's been a good since 2011, 2012 that I've been kind of trying to find my way back here.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. So, at what point in your career did you start actually getting work into galleries? Was it when you were in New York? Was it after you got back home to Arizona? When did that start happening?
It was a little bit of, I want to say maybe Southern California.
Okay.
When I was there, I remember um, when my senior year, they kind of help you. They had this program thing where each senior could actually have a piece of artwork. They team up with different galleries, and so whatever their work seems appropriate, they did like an art walk, and your artwork could be in there and stuff. And so I remember being in a gallery down there in Laguna Beach, and the work actually sold, which is an amazing feeling, you know.
Yeah.
And then I remember in Santa Ana, a friend of ours, him and his wife opened up a loft, or they bought a loft and they opened it up as a little gallery space as well. And so at this time, it was great because there's so many people coming up that it was me, my buddy Richard Salcido, Blaine Fontana, um, gosh, so many artists, that have, gosh, blown up since. We were all just barely coming up. You know what I mean? So it was great to have that outlet. I remember doing stuff with Sour Harvest. A couple group shows here and there.
Oh wow.
You know, yeah.
Was that before ThinkSpace or?
Oh yeah, yeah. It was before ThinkSpace. Yeah,
Okay.
and then I actually sold work. Here's a funny story. I sold work at a gallery that I worked at in Laguna Beach. It was the best. It was the funniest situation. So I worked. It was Figure Hut Galleries. It was like this gallery that they did their own publishing. They had like three galleries, one in Northern California, San Diego, or La Jolla, San Diego, and Laguna Beach. So I was the gallery assistant. I shipped work, I hung work, I threw trash, I did it all. You know what I mean? And so as I started kind of doing these. I started mimicking some of these paintings that I saw of like these kind of abstract landscapes and stuff. And so eventually, my boss, the director, kind of she liked the work, and so she gave it a try. And actually, I had my own plaque, with my name and this and that. But to kind of romanticize it, they didn't tell the client that this is him. You know what I mean? Like, oh, do you want to meet the artist? He's vacuuming, or he's
Yeah,
out there
he's
throwing the
just right
trash.
over there.
Yeah. So we made like a great little resume and this and that. And it was awesome. Like, I could be vacuuming or dusting and like listening to the listening to the gallery reps, talking to clients and selling the work. I mean, there was even times where I even installed my work in people's homes and, still
Oh
didn't
wow.
say like, oh, it was, hi, it's me. You know what I
And
mean?
they didn't even know. They had
No,
no idea.
no, not at all, man.
That's really cool. What is your working environment like now? Like, do you have a dedicated studio space away from your home, or do you work at your home? How is your working environment?
Currently it's away from home. It's in my mom's backyard, which is
Okay.
the same house that I grew up in. So my mom stays in the room that I grew up destroying it and stuff. So it's all painted white, but I'm sure if you kind of chisel into that paint, you'll see spray paint and stuff. But yeah, so when we moved back, we ended up living in Tempe, and when we realized that we were going to have a son or have a baby, I was working, at the house. So I approached my mom about building a studio in her backyard. So we built one, and so it was convenient because I could ride my bike back and forth. And then about coming up on 2 years, I just bought a house in Mesa, which was my grandmother's house that I grew up in. I grew up coming to,
Oh, wow.
and so now I live in Mesa. So, but I still go to the studio in Tempe in my mom's house. I do have plans on building one here on site, but
Okay.
in due time.
That's interesting. So you actually live in the house that you went to, that your grandmother lived in when you were a kid.
Yeah, yeah. I
Oh,
mean,
wow.
yeah. Now I'm maintaining the lawn, and
It's
now it's
amazing.
mine.
It's like full circle. That's incredible.
Right? Isn't that crazy?
So as far as like your art style, you or the mediums that you work in, you predominantly work in acrylic on wood panel. Are
Yeah.
there other mediums that you enjoy working in?
I've been introducing some aerosol into the work, and that's a whole nother amazing thing. Like seeing how technology of spray paint has come up and evolved. Like there's actually spray paint for graffiti, for murals. Like what? Like it's either you had Krylon, Rust-Oleum, or True Value brand or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's amazing now to see the quality, the more quote unquote artist quality spray paint. So
Do you find that they're actually different, or is it just like a marketing thing?
the consistency is weird. It's almost more chalky.
Really?
Yeah, it clogs up tips like crazy now. But you can like I said, it's powdery almost. Like you can make a really nice fade, and then all of a sudden, rub something against it or your hand, and all of a sudden half of it just kind of falls off. Yeah. So it's fun to play with though. It's kind of cool to kind of go back and reintroduce, go back to the can from what I started with, and then you know introduce it into the work again.
That's really cool. Are there other mediums that you haven't had a chance to play with that you'd want to explore?
I'd like to go back and play with oils.
Mm.
Because I think that's where I started with, when I was doing the figure and everything. Um, and then when I started with acrylics, I hated acrylics, and now I love it for I love it for what it is.
Yeah.
But
What
yeah,
did
I
you
would
hate
like.
about it? Why did you hate acrylics?
Oh my god, it dried so quick. It was hard to go back into something because your paints would dry. It's like, oh gosh, how can I color match this and whatnot? And it's got such a flat plastic quality to it. But now those are the things that I love about it. I would like to go back and play with some casein again too. Casein is pretty fun. Yeah, I am getting back into experimenting with printmaking too, which is cool.
Okay. Very
Yeah,
cool. What kind of printmaking is it, like screen printing or?
no, like lino cuts
Okay.
and wood blocks and stuff.
Is that
Yeah.
something that you had done like during school?
hmm Yeah, yeah. I remember when I lived with my buddy Richard Salcido in Orange. I remember sitting in the garage and just having a piece of wood and just cutting out a wood block. And I didn't have a printer, so I just remember driving my truck over to make prints. Use what you got.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's
it was
amazing.
great. I think I still have. I remember doing some prints of like some Beatles, and I think I still got them somewhere.
That's incredible. How do you choose the subjects for your work? So you work a lot with desert life, whether plant life or animal life. How do you settle on what you're ultimately going to paint?
I don't. I don't know. I have like an arsenal of images that either if I'm flipping through books or if I have a file on my desktop where I just like if I see cactus or whatever, I'll just take a picture, different angles and whatnot.
Mm.
I'll usually find there usually will be one thing that will kind of be a jump off point, like whether it's a hedgehog cactus with that's blooming or something. I'll uh I'll start with that, and then just go from there. Just start adding, almost like arranging florals, just adding to it. Lately, it has been more with the backgrounds. I think that in kind of priming me, I got this bug. I don't know if I need to get it out of me or what, but I've been doing these abstracts and these just laying down different layers and stuff, because I was doing solid backgrounds for a while with just, with the work, and now I'm incorporating more movement into the background along with the subject matter and playing with that. So
Do you find that even when pieces have birds or animals, do you find that the launching point or the starting point is still the plant life for you?
I think so. Yeah, yeah. It's funny. It's like you think you're doing something different. I remember having this conversation with Joe Soren, um, which is funny. We're driving in a van up to Flagstaff, but anyways, we were we were laughing because we were talking on how he was saying he'd be painting, and all of a sudden he'd make a couple strokes, and he was thinking in his head, "Oh my gosh, this is it, man! I've opened doors. I'm doing something really new here. This that, And then you stand back when it's done, you're like, yeah, it looks just like my work. You know what I mean? I'm not inventing anything new, but yeah, I think it's funny how that happens during the process where you think you're doing something really, because you always want to. I don't know if you want to outdo yourself, but you want to do the best you can for each piece. You know what I mean?
Sure, yeah.
And there's always like one little section, whether it's like 3 inches squared or something, one little area where you think, this is going to really open doors. But it's funny.
That's cool. And as somebody whose main focus are elements of nature, do
Hmm.
you find that or have you always been really good at observing the world around you, or is it something that you had to develop or cultivate?
No, I think going back to these stories of when I was a kid, about just kind of being quiet, and they said I didn't cry much and this and that. I think I've always been an observer.
Mm,
I was never like completely just really quiet, wouldn't talk to anyone. I was social and stuff like that, but I think my whole life I've been an observer. Watching people, watching things. Just yeah, I'm still like that. Definitely, I'm an observer. Hmm.
and you've described your style as artificial realism. Can you? I mean, I think. I mean, when you look at the work, that makes a lot of sense to me. But can you explain what you mean by that?
Um, well, the artificiality of using a medium that's plastic. There's this, it's like a there's there's a plasticity to this medium. It's you're using paint, using acrylic paint, and you're using subject matter, you're painting subject matter in a way that I guess that's realistic, but it's really, I don't know how to explain it, but it's not realistic. But it can be, I'm painting the essence of something that can be seen as realistic, but it's still an environment that's completely not, that's not realistic. I'm adding elements like if I want to add subtropical plants to desert plants, or mix tropical plants with dead things, and yet they seem to be thriving in this composition.
Yeah.
It seems believable, like they're cohabitating, but it's completely artificial.
Well, you also incorporate these color glitches, is what
Hmm.
I've seen you call them before. What
Yeah,
was the origin of that? Where did that first begin?
it was it was more of when you're coming up, it's when you're still trying to find your voice. I was doing whatever I could to just you're trying to express yourself, you're trying to just add different things and not make it gimmicky, but you obviously, you know artists tend to will sometimes wear their influences on their sleeve. People will try to influence people, or will add elements of people that influence them into their work.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And I really liked that idea of like when a TV would glitch up, or like
Okay.
or when you would see, you know, you would see paintings like, obviously, someone like Alex Kanevsky that would he would take an image and yet just blur it out, but you could still be able to read it, like someone like Giacometti, where Alberto Giacometti, when you look at his paintings, there's this certain vibrancy with it that happens, but if you try to focus on one area, it completely falls apart.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, like even like British painter Ewan Uglow, who I'm a big fan of. He would leave elements of these ticks of measurements, which were completely intentional. Because he was really, stickler for measurements and whatnot, but it became part of the piece. You know what I mean? And so it's like, how do I find my voice? How do I find, you know, it became this intentional. I would try to put these glitches in, but after a while you look at it and you're like, it looks like so much after the fact. You know what I mean? And eventually it just kind of evolved into like a language. It would be like a controlled chaos where I would add things to it as I would paint it,
Oh, wow.
and then go back into it and take it out and go back into it. And then now it's almost by habit. It's almost it works as a compositional element, but it also works as a sense of movement,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, and as far as like how you uh, create your compositions, you've said that you don't really put a ton of upfront thought towards the composition, but you like to just sit down and sort of embrace the spontaneity of it all and
Yeah.
have it be more organic, which is interesting to me because a lot of the artists that I talk to or am friends with are super like they labor over the plan, labor over they'll do sketches, little pencil sketches, and then inks, and then like tons of work goes into planning the ultimate composition. Whereas I feel like you're sitting down and you're embracing the spontaneity of the whole experience, which is interesting. Is
Yeah.
that how you've always been, or is it something that you sort of
Yeah.
wanted to encourage yourself to be better at?
Yeah, for sure. It's like, I don't know, for me, it's like if I'm going to make a composition of it, labor over making a composition, and I got it to where I wanted to get it, it's like, well, why do it again? It's like it's already done. You already did the problem solving. Now you're just filling in the lines, you know what I mean? But I have been using I've been stepping into the 21st century and using my computer. I've been using Affinity Photo, which is like Photoshop, but I've been collaging, super rough, but on the computer, which has really helped um, with the process. It's fun to sit down at night and just kind of take some of these photos that I have on my computer and just cut them out and layer them, and it's like, whoa, like, okay, that was kind of quick. Like that seemed kind of, I feel a little dirty, you know.
You cheated.
You know what I mean? Yeah, I cheated. Like, whoa, but I'm learning to embrace that. You know what I mean? Because everything I've done has been analog. Completely analog, and it's a great tool. Like it helps things go faster. It's like, okay, I don't need to. It's like I don't need to prove to anyone now that, oh, I'm drawing this. This is me. This is me. Like I'm putting this together. Like, no, you know what I mean? Like if you want me to draw something, I'll draw it. But when it comes to, you come to a certain time where, like I say, art is fast these days, man. Things happen at such a fast rate, and this just helps with the process.
What is your typical like workflow on a painting? From blank canvas to or blank panel rather to a finished piece. How does it all come together?
um Usually it's a lot of kicking and screaming getting into the studio. No, I'll usually have several substrates kind of at different stages, but I'll take like some canvas, or if I have a panel and stuff, and I'll just start throwing paint on them, you know doing something, and just start to work that. And as I'm doing that, during that process, I'm kind of looking and playing with ideas, and I'm like, oh man, the blue on this is awesome. Like, I like to play with, you know um, opposite colors too. You know what I mean? So if I have a blue background, I would really like to, find an image that has a lot of, or play with something that has a lot of orange. You know what I mean? And stuff like that. So that will actually be the jump off point. That will feed a lot of it. So once I find that, and once I kind of draw something onto the panel, um, I'll usually just lock in and mix up a palette, and just start going from there. You know,
Just continue to just paint on it.
just yeah, yeah. Sometimes some of them will kind of sit in the corner for a while, and then the hardest thing is going back into it. But like I just completed this 48 by 48 for a local show called Chaos Theory, and it was a painting that I started earlier this year that I slowly worked on, but it wasn't like going back to it. It was more like, if I spend too much time on a piece, and if it sits there for too long, it can be tough to get that hype back. You know what I mean? So I like to really kind of pound it out as much as I can, as quick, not as quick as I can, but hold on to that I don't know, that just hold on to that train of movement in that piece, I guess you could say, you know?
I mean, do you find that it's hard to get back in that mind space if you leave something on the side for a while?
Yeah, yeah, it's that's the you said it perfect. Yeah, it's hard to get back in that mind space because then the more that it sits there, you're like, oh man, we there's so much change that happens. You're like, I'm a different person from when I started this. Like my decisions are completely different. I'd want to approach this different now,
Interesting.
and then you'd have to, feel like you either have to go over it completely, which I've done before. I've been halfway into a painting and just completely wiped it out and painted over again. You know what I mean?
Oh man.
But I think also my time in the studio is a bit limited now. So I need to take advantage as much as I can in there. There's times where I go into the studio and I get nothing done. But if I feel like if I take out the trash or move something around, I did something. You know what I mean? For me, it's like as long as I show up, that's a good day. Because I go my studio practice now is I go before work.
Okay. Like early in the morning?
Yeah, so I get up at around 5, and then you know they get showered, get ready, and then head on over. Try to spend at least a couple hours in there before work.
Okay. And then after work it's dad. You're putting your dad hat on, right?
Yeah, it's family time. Yeah, exactly.
How do you feel that your style has evolved throughout the course of your career?
Um, how do I feel? It's evolved. It's definitely evolved. Um, there's times where it feels like I've taken steps back. It seems sometimes it feels like you take one step forward and then you take four steps back. It's really hard to say because there's times where I'll look back at work that I did like in 2008 and go, God, how did I do that? You know what I mean? I couldn't do that now. You know what I mean? Or
Do you think that that's do you think that that's real, or is it more just your own self-consciousness, just doubting yourself?
oh, it's complete self-consciousness. Yeah, yeah, it's completely doubting yourself and stuff. You know what I mean? I mean, I go through these bouts. I'm sure I can vouch for a lot of artists, but I mean, every artist is different. But there's times where I'll just there's so many peaks and valleys that happen. You know what I mean? When you're in it and you're on a grind and you're on a flow. I mean, that's just life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you ride that wave, and then you all of a sudden start to hit those valleys, and you start to question your work.
Mm.
You start to question the validity of it, or then you think about your invisible audience. Whether people will like it or not, or I shouldn't add this or I can't add this to it because people think it's dumb or whatever. And once you start to feed into that, you just
Yeah, you just got to let that go, man. Yeah, you know?
yeah, it can be deep, man. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And then when you see it from an outside, but when you see someone else going through it, you just say, oh, just buck up.
Right,
Just go
right.
make a bunch of art. But when you're in it yourself, you're just like, you know, and it's even hard sometimes just getting in the studio. Like it's always like when they're trying to get Bugs Bunny to take a bath. He's like, yeah. But gosh, I that question that's a big question. But I do think that it's a self conscious thing.
Right on. You mentioned that your time in the studio is in the morning before your day job, and so I want to talk to you a little bit about your day job at Mesa Art Center.
Yeah.
Did you start working there right when you moved back to Arizona, or how did you get involved with the art center?
Um. Well, a little history of when I moved back from New York. Uh, my wife was working for the company that I was working for. I was like a rep for them. So she ended up taking over my job and I was pursuing painting. And then it came to the point again where it's like, okay, I need to work. So I remember going, making, making my resume and then just hitting the pavement and going to galleries in Scottsdale, walking around, uh, handing out resumes, seeing if anyone needs an art handler, and I remember walking into a gallery, Bonner David Gallery, and I gave it to the owner and she looked at it and she looked at me and she's like, "Aren't you Frank Gonzalez, the painter?" I'm like, "Yeah, but I need a job." But what, I made that contact, and then they weren't looking for anyone, and then sure enough, she forwarded me an email that the Tempe Center for the Arts was looking for an art handler, like a preparator, and because I made that connection with her, and she just kind of threw it my way, I ended up getting a job at the Tempe Center for the Arts, and from there, it was a city job, but the position only allowed 19 hours, so it was only part time. And then the preparator that left there was at the Mesa Art Center, and my buddy Marco, and he needed some help with an install, and I was kind of hesitant because then you have to go through this whole process, in order to be, you got to get fingerprinted, you got to do this, you got to do that, and I guess I was just being lazy, and I'm like, I don't want to go through all this, but luckily I did. So got I was I was a temp, and so I ended up working both places part time, and then with a new baby and all. So it was tiring. And then eventually Mesa hired me on full time, and I've been there for 5 years now.
Interesting. So, I mean, what I find interesting is a lot of artists, when they have day jobs or whatever, they're a lot of times doing commercial work or creating art for other people or companies. But your day job is effectively helping to share other artists' work, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Which is a totally different way of doing a day job, and that must feel pretty rewarding, just the fact that you're helping to get other artists' work out there.
Oh man, it's an amazing position to be in. I think my position there at the museum is it's pretty amazing. I feel super fortunate with the crew that I work with because there's only four of us that run that museum. There's two curators, me, and a registrar. And so, as a preparator, to be part of the curatorial process as well, that's kind of unheard of in a lot of institutions. You know what I mean? And so, coming from the background that I come from, and with the connections that I've made, with places like ThinkSpace and whatnot, and um, we're able to cross pollinate and bring some of those artists, you know, out here to the valley, and it's an amazing feeling. Like, it's super cool to be able to, on a selfish level, to be able to co-curate a show and bring artists that you want to see because you can't travel and go see it somewhere else. So it's like, I'm going to make sure it gets here. You know what I mean? Like, shit, we had a figurative show, and I was able to bring Ann Gale and, Alex Kanevsky and all these amazing, amazing artists. And boom, here they are,
So in addition to working as a preparator, you're also doing curation as well, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Is that something that you enjoy? Do you enjoy that aspect of it?
Oh yeah, it's super cool. It's exciting. It's funny. It is curating, but it's mostly just, it's allowed me to cold contact some of these artists or some of the galleries they work with, and to be able to use, the name Mesa Contemporary Art Museum, and not be just some random guys contacting you and saying, "Hey, I'd like to show your work." No, it's actually more professional. So I could say, "Hey, we love your work. We'd love to invite you to the show," and actually get a response.
Yeah, that's really cool. And you guys team up with, you mentioned ThinkSpace, but you guys team up with a bunch of galleries around the country, which is interesting because not a lot of museums have that sort of a dynamic. How did that start? Was it your connections with the different galleries, or were they doing that even before you were involved?
No, they've worked with local galleries before. They've worked with, um, some artists, like several artists, that are from one gallery. They'd end up working with the gallery and stuff like that. So they did that stuff, like, way before I got there. But I do remember, because ThinkSpace has such a great way of kind of having this, I don't know how you'd say it, but like this, the way they package it, the way they can just have like a traveling show, like in a crate, boom, like, it's cool the way they got their thing down, man. They're killing it, and
Yeah.
they're great people to work with. And so I remember sitting in a meeting and saying, ThinkSpace, is able to do these shows so many different places, where they'll take over and just do a whole room of 12 by 12s, and then feature this artist and do this and that. I'm like, what if we brought that here? Like I just threw it on the table to see if they would bite, to see if it's something that, you know, um, if the people at the museum would be interested in it, you know what I mean? If my colleagues would be down for something like that, and they were totally down for it. And since then, we've had such a great relationship. It's so cool to be able to have that cross pollination.
Yeah, that's amazing. And what's coming up next for you? What shows do you have coming up?
Um, right now, next I'm having locally. I'm going to be in a show. I got invited to the Invitational by Ed Mel Gallery. I don't know if you're familiar with Ed Mel, but he's pretty big time in the whole Western art world. And I kind of aspire to that guy. He did that whole, he lived in New York a long time ago. He was doing art and came back, and now he's a staple in the Southwest. You know what I mean? It's Ed fucking Mel. Like it's cool. It's great. So I'm in that. And then I know I'll be doing just group shows here and there. Um, I know there's the Moleskin Project, and then I think there's some couple things at Antler Gallery. So yeah, there's some things lined up. Pretty excited about.
Very cool. And what's tell me a little bit about the recent experimentation and studies you've been doing. I see a lot of like rap artists coming up on your Instagram.
Oh man, I know, right? It's so funny. It's like you look at my Instagram and it looks like that's all I do, you know? So a little history behind those actually is a buddy of mine that I came up with at MCC at Mesa Community College. He went out to go to Chicago, and him and a buddy of mine, JT. And so we'd always meet up, back in Arizona for the holidays and stuff. And he was showing me these drawings that him and JT were doing. Like they would go to the Field Museum and they would do these little kind of these silly little compositions with crayons, but when you really break it down, it's like it's an amazing painting exercise because you got this completely limited palette,
Right.
And you're working with just flat planes of color.
Right. Yeah.
And yet, how do you create space, create a readable image, create a composition with it? So not only are you working from observation, but you're also really having to pick and choose how you're going to work. You know what I mean? If something is light colored, you might have to do it bright ass pink. You know what I mean? So they look kind of funky, but there's definitely there's a lesson behind it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And so especially when you're using nice rag arches paper, with crayons. And after experimenting with those, I took it on too. So they influenced me to do it. And then eventually learning to use Caran d'Ache or the water soluble crayons because there's you can get more opaque with those. I've always kind of gone back to those as just I never thought about sharing them, but they were just like fun things to do observationally. And since because of social media, we can post whatever we want.
Just share everything.
Yeah, and so I don't know. I just thought it'd be fun to, things that I enjoy, things that influenced me. You know what I mean? It's like, what if I do these? Because I would always do them primarily with still lifes, and so I'm thinking, well, what if I do some of these MCs? That's always influenced me. And you're kind of laughing, kind of chuckling, like by the time you're done looking at it, because like I'll do Old Dirty Bastard, but it's like it's funny, it's great. So then it's like it just fuels the fire. Like, oh man, what else can I do? What else can I do?
Yeah.
So then I was like, I remember doing one of Blood In, Blood Out. Like I love that movie. I did one of Miklo. I did one of Selena that I completely butchered. But
it's cool that it's something that you enjoy, but also sort of a challenge to yourself to work with such a limited palette. And like some of the things that you said,
yeah,
it's simultaneously sort of a treat, but also a challenge.
Yeah, it's fun, man. It's just something. Yeah, it's about having fun, because sometimes in your work, when you get so used to just being on this train, you know what I mean. You need to, once you get used to what you're doing, you need to mix it up. You got to do something else. You know what I mean? Whether this is, I don't see this feeding it's funny. Like, I don't want to say this is my work and this is my other work. It's just, for me, it's just work. It's just, you're on this earth once. You just produce what you want. Just make stuff,
Exactly.
and so that's all I'm doing, man. Trying to make as much stuff as I can you know, before I'm in the grave.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're right at the end now. So why don't you tell people where they can find you online?
You could find me at frankgonzales.net. It's Gonzales with an S. Or you can find me on Instagram at Gonzales Frank. Pretty simple. Um,
I'll put these all in the show notes, by the way, so they'll be able to get to them. And there's one last question, and something that I want to ask everybody that I have on the show. Who is one artist that you'd like to see me try and have on the show?
Oh man, one artist I'd like to see you have, obviously alive. Oh man, you know what? I would love for you to either. Oh man, one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not gonna hold you to that,
but see, look at this is like curating, so it's cool. So it's like, now that you have this platform, it's like, who can I invite to this? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah. I don't know. I think Alex Gray would be cool, man. Alex Gray would be really cool. Robert Williams would be badass. That guy's got stories, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right, man. Well, thank you a ton for coming on the show. Seriously, I'm really grateful that you took the time to come on, and it's been great having you on.
Oh man, thanks for having me, man. Man, for sure. Thank you so much, dude.
So that's it for this episode of Art Affairs. I hope you enjoyed my talk with Frank. I really like the way that he relates his life with Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. I looked into that quite a bit before I did the interview, because I had known that he had sort of associated his life with that. And I think it's spot on. Like, if you know anything about what that is, so Joseph Campbell sort of identified this typical story structure that he calls the hero's journey, which involves a protagonist that typically will travel off to far-off exotic lands, go on adventures, learn all kinds of new things, really grow as a human being, and then eventually return back home to use all of those lessons that he learned to benefit the people of his hometown. That's the hero's journey that Joseph Campbell described, and I think it perfectly fits with Frank's trajectory through life. He grew up in Mesa, or Tempe rather, born in Mesa, grew up in Tempe, went to art school in Southern California, lived there for 6 years, moved all the way across the country to New York, completely different climate, completely different life experience, for another 6 years, learned a ton of lessons there, and then eventually reconnected with his sweetheart and moved back to Mesa, working at the museum there, using all of the lessons that he learned throughout his life to benefit the people of his hometown. I think that perfectly captures Frank to a T, and I'm really glad I was able to talk to him about it. Thanks again to Frank for joining me, and thank you for checking out the show. Your support genuinely means the world to me. Feel free to shoot me an email if you have any suggestions for the show, or if there's a guest you want me to try and have on. Also, if you have any questions you'd like me to ask future guests, send those over too. I'd love to hear any and all feedback you might have for me. You can contact me through my website at artaffairespodcast.com. And like I said at the front of the show, you can also go there to check out previous episodes. You can also find the show on Instagram and Facebook at Art Affairs Podcast. And on Twitter, it's at art_affairs. And last but not least, if I've managed to get the show up on Apple Podcasts by the time you listen to this, I'd really appreciate it if you took a moment to rate and review the show. I can't tell you how much that actually helps. So until next time, be good to yourself and be good to each other.